He shouts like a wild animal on stage, crazy, angry, and unyielding. People witness a calm man talking calmly, with no drugs or alcohol, and always carrying a notebook to write down his ideas on life, death, and compassion. Randy has been the lead singer of Lamb of God, one of the most important metal bands of the 21st century. He has been through highs and lows, and even the courtroom. He spent time in jail in Europe for the death of a teenage admirer. Got lost in the turmoil of his own ego and never-ending binges. He didn't run away, though. Instead, he came back, stood trial, accepted the consequences, and started over from the worst part of his life. Randy is not like other heroes. He doesn't yell to make people hate him, but to remind us, fury can be right. That's why, some 30 years later, he still stands out. The scream of a man who knows how to hear himself. How did someone who was formerly charged with homicide, addicted to drugs, and going through violent stages become a symbol of awakening, freedom, and responsibility in the metal world? It's hard to hear the answer, just like his scream, but it's worth it. David Randall Blythe was born on February 21, 1971. I grew up in Virginia, a state where foggy woodlands meet small industrial towns, all in the conservative style of the American South. His family didn't have any artistic experience. He didn't learn how to handle a microphone or write lyrics from anyone. He learned how to be rebellious from the streets, from nights when he couldn't sleep, and from the ancient cassette player he covertly played Sex Pistols and Bad Brains recordings on. Randy worked as a cook, a roofer, and everything else he could think of to make ends meet. His pals dreamed of permanent jobs, but he never felt like he fit in with any of them. He once claimed he didn't grow up with metal, which is strange because he would later become a metal frontman. Punk music was his religion back then, and bands didn't have to sing well. Just be honest. You don't need to know how to do it, just use your voice. In those two chord songs, Randy lost control and had angry outbursts for no cause. That pandemonium, with no rules, no leadership, and no direction, made a young man with a rebellious ego and a mind that was unstable yet raw. And out of that chaos, a stage leader and a guy who was willing to take charge would come to be. Early career in 1995, when Randy Blythe was 24 years old, he joined an extreme band named Burn the Priest. The name alone was enough to scare promoters and make clergy angry. It wasn't a planned move, it was a gut reaction, a rebellious response to a society that Randy never felt like he belonged to. He had never had any voice lessons up to that point. He didn't know what the term scream technique meant. Randy yelled with all the energy he had in his body. And that was what made him stand out. Randy's voice was different from everyone else's. And even though most of them couldn't understand a word he screamed, they knew it was true. Burn the Priest immediately became well known in the underground world, but they hit a wall almost as quickly. Their name. The band made a choice when they started obtaining chances to play outside of the underground. They would call themselves Lamb of God. Not to make their energy less strong, but to hide it under a moniker that is full of sarcasm. A snarky yet very powerful shift from Burn the Priest to Lamb of God. People in the audience were no longer scared, they were interested. Their first album as New American Gospel was made in complete turmoil. Randy sang all the parts in about 8 hours, with beer, cigarette smoke, and a small studio all around him. He remembered, "I pretty much screamed my throat raw. I didn't know what technique was, I just knew I had to scream until it hurt." The band didn't have a deal with a major label, a PR campaign, or a creative vision. They only had music, anger, and a dream they didn't identify. But because of that lack, Lamb of God made something that no one else could copy: raw, unvarnished truth. And Randy, who was a roofing guy who could yell, became the center of all that anger. A good job. Lamb of God, who had a problematic moniker in the underground scene, became one of the most important metal bands of the 21st century under Randy Blythe's leadership. They were compared to Slipknot, Pantera, and even called the next generation Metallica. The CD Ashes of the Wake, which came out in 2004, was a musical manifesto on war, imperialism, and righteous indignation. This was the first big step forward. The album sold more than 250,000 copies in the US alone and was the band's first time on the Billboard 200. The song Laid to Rest became an anti-Iraq war anthem, while Now You've Got Something to Die For was seen as an angry hymn for a whole generation. In 2006, they put out Sacrament, which got them their first Grammy nomination for the song Redneck and reached number 8 on the Billboard 200. This is an amazing achievement for a metal band that isn't very well known. This record made Randy's scream more than just a noise. It was a warning that was strong, planned, and full of emotion. They didn't stop there. The band's fame grew with global tours for Wrath, 2009, and Resolution, 2012, which sold out arenas in the US, Europe, South America, and Asia. Lamb of God played at big festivals like Download in the UK, Hellfest in France, Rock am Ring in Germany, and Ozfest in the US. Randy was more than just a frontman. He helped shape the identity of artists. His lyrics, whether they were about politics, religion, or his own thoughts, always made people want to talk. He once said, "I don't scream to let off steam. I yell to get others to think about themselves." After Lamb of God, Randy became a popular collaborator and sang with many other bands. Gajira, Love for None. Overkill, The Way of All Flesh, and Skull and Bones. Soulfly, Dead Behind the Eyes, Clutch, Suicide, Silence, Devil Driver, Body Count, and more. They picked Randy not just because of his unique voice, but also because he had a strong presence that made it seem like he was carrying the weight of truth with every scream. He has made films about music and movies, such as Metal, A Headbanger's Journey, Working Class Rockstar, and The Zen of Screaming. He even acted in The Graves in 2009 and more recently starred in an action movie by the Taiwanese metal band Trithonic. Randy went from being a man who shouted to stay alive to being a symbol of educated, heartfelt screaming as an art form. But the highest point of his career was a fall that no stage could have prepared him for. The death of a fan and a trial in another country. The event in Prague. Randy Blythe got to Prague, Czech Republic, on June 27, 2012. Lamb of God was going to play there after being gone for 2 years. But as he got off the plane, an armed police force was already there. No warning, no counsel, and no trial. They put Randy in handcuffs and took him straight to the police. He was accused of killing someone. 2 years ago, Daniel Nosek, a 19-year-old fan, climbed onto the stage several times during a show at the Modest Abaton Club in Prague. There was a time when Randy was said to have pushed him into the crowd. Nosek fell backward, hit his head on the ground, lost consciousness, went into a coma, and died a few weeks later. The band members didn't know what had happened. They hadn't heard from anyone. Up until that day at the airport. Randy spent 37 days at Pankrak prison. A building from the 1800s that the Nazis used to hold political prisoners. He wrote in his book Dark Days that the prison had falling walls, barbed wire, and an antique clock that was the only sign of time. At that point, he could have done what a lot of artists do: run away, refuse to be extradited, or just walk away. But Randy elected to go back to Prague on his own to face the music. Not because they have to, but because it's the right thing to do. He added, "I can't yell about being responsible and then run away when it's time to be responsible." In February 2013, the trial happened. Randy testified on the stand that he pushed a fan off the stage, but he didn't know how badly the guy was hurt. He said that he couldn't see well, didn't wear glasses while performing, and thought Nosek was the same person who had come up to him twice before. He thought that the mob would grab him like they had hundreds of times before, but this time they didn't. The Prague City Court said on March 5, 2013, that Randy Blythe was not guilty of a crime. But he was morally responsible for Daniel Nosek's death. The main problem was with the people who organized it and the lack of security. There were no barriers or people in charge of the stage. The prosecution filed an appeal. But the Czech Supreme Court agreed with the decision in June of that year. Randy came back to the US, but not with his head held high or any victory speech. He was just a tired, slimmer, quieter man. He remarked in a later interview, "I'm not a killer, but I was on that stage that day. I get why his family is hurting. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want to live up to the scream I give." This situation, which was both strange and painful, changed Randy Blythe. It changed him from a fierce frontman into a thoughtful artist. And from that point on, his life changed. It was no longer driven by drink, ego, or rage. A trail that went in, starting on a stage where one man fell and never got back up. Rebirth? Randy Blythe came back to America after the Prague trial as a different person. He had formerly yelled against everything, including war, religion, authority, and even himself. But when he stood in court for the first time over a fan's death, he learned how to be quiet, to listen, to write, and not to be the man who screamed for the world, but the man who asked himself questions. Randy's memoir, Dark Days, came out in 2015. A book based on real events, such 37 days in prison, periods of depression, and the road back from the edge. There was no glamour, and no acting like a victim. He admitted his sins without making excuses and didn't shy away from the grief of others. It was a confession and a method to heal himself. Randy also stopped drinking alcohol around the same time. It was the one thing that had been with him on every tour. He chose to stay sober, not to look good, but to stay alive through all the crazy things that happened in his adolescence. A lot of his friends, other vocalists, and metalheads had died because of their drug use. He was still alive and wanted his life to have meaning. I used to assume that pain made art, but now I think that consciousness makes something that lasts longer than agony. And so, a different Randy came out. Not angry for no reason anymore. His scream, which was still a firestorm on stage, now came from someone who knew exactly what would happen with every motion, every word, and every time he talked to someone else. He started meditating, writing in a journal every morning, and talking about stoicism in interviews. Not as a scholar, but as a man who once thought he was untouchable and then learned how fragile he truly was. In 2020, Randy and Brewdog worked together to make a non-alcoholic beer called Ghostwalker, which is named after the song Ghost Walking, which he wrote when he first stopped using drugs. It wasn't just a thing, it was a sign of new life. Randy's second book, Just Beyond the Light, came out in 2025. It was deeper, quieter, and almost like a meditation journal from someone who had been through sad times. He didn't yell or preach in its pages. He just muttered, "Life isn't something to control, it's something to listen to and hear what it's trying to tell us in the silence." Randy Blythe used to be a frontman who cursed like a sailor. Now he can still yell, but then he can stand back, grin, and declare, "I don't need to win anymore, I just need to be real." Influence and legacy. In the metal world, where wrath is seen as a source of raw power, Randy Blythe accomplished something that no one saw coming. He turned rage into right and wrong. Not the fake, showy sort, but a morality that comes from knowing how your actions will affect others, feeling their suffering, and still having the courage to speak the truth. Randy isn't a symbol in the usual way. He doesn't sing well by classical standards. He doesn't have a classic ballad. He never had a hit on the radio, but he built something much more lasting, unflinching love from metal fans all around the world. For them, Randy is more than just the voice of Lamb of God. He speaks for a generation that feels left out, misunderstood, and criticized. He has made his imprint on more than 10 studio albums, including Ashes of the Wake, Sacrament, Wrath, Resolution, and Lamb of God, 2020, which was the band's big comeback album after a long break. He is the band's main lyricist, and he turned Lamb of God from a band that just screamed into an artistic revolt with meaning and purpose. As a collaborator, he sang with big bands like Gojira, Overkill, Devil Driver, Soulfly, Body Count, and Clutch, where his voice didn't just add to the songs but held them together. It wasn't just guest work, it was being there. Randy is a rare writer in the world of extreme metal who can turn the language of screaming into writing. Dark Days is more than just a memoir, it's a confession and a statement of honesty. Rolling Stone and Kerrang have called the book deeply human and brave. It is a literary testimony to pain and reality. As a seeker, Randy has become a symbol of recovery, proof that rock music doesn't have to lead to addiction and death. If the artist is brave enough to change, it might be a journey toward the light. In the end, Randy Blythe's huge power doesn't come from his skills, the media attention he gets, or the amount of records he sells. It's something easier. He lived up to everything he yelled. No running, no blaming, and no faking. Many artists hide behind fake identities, but Randy came up and stated, "I'm real. I have made mistakes, but I'm not fake." That is why people trust, respect, and will continue to listen to him long after his scream dies away. Life now. Randy Blythe is no longer the face of every metal news story. He's in his 50s now. But for those who really follow him, he is now living a fuller life than ever, even though the stage lights have dimmed a little. Lamb of God is still going strong. Their most recent album, Omens, 2022, got a lot of praise for its powerful sound and topical, passionate lyrics about war, political division, climate disaster, and the moral deterioration of society as a whole. This wasn't simply another metal record. It was a warning from the future. Delivered in Randy's growl, which was now crisper, more aware, and clearer than before. Randy came back with Pigface, the famous 90s avant industrial supergroup, in 2023. He said that what started as a few guest spots developed into a whole tour because it was too much fun and seemed too natural at that time. He doesn't play to win anymore, he plays for fun. As an artist who has seen both the best and worst of life. That year, he kept writing. His second novel, Just Beyond the Light, came out in 2025 and was less about prison or rebellion and more about calm thoughts on time, life, death, and waking up. It was a new beginning, with less yelling and more listening. Randy has done more than just write. He has taught, taken beautiful photos, and spoken at conferences about mental health, meditation, and addiction recovery. He doesn't hide from his past. He uses it instead as proof that people may fall badly and still keep going if they are willing to face themselves. It's amazing that Randy has such a strong connection with his fans. There are meaningful connections that aren't noisy, like book signings, intimate gatherings, and sincere blogs. Randy Blythe doesn't need to prove anything at 54. He still sings, writes, and lives consciously, and he marches forward with peaceful confidence. I will keep making something important as long as I am alive. Randy Blythe is not a fallen angel or a faultless icon. To be understood, you have to scream. To be forgiven, you have to remain quiet. He is a real man. He once yelled like there was no tomorrow, drank himself to death, and appeared in court for the death of a fan. Then he got back up. He roped, he meditated, he was aware of what was going on around him, and he still yelled. But now that I understand, Randy wasn't crushed in an industry where celebrity can destroy everything in its path. He converted his problems into words, his sorrow into lessons, and every performance into a way to provide energy instead of looking for praise. Randy Blythe screams like a prayer at a time when yelling is frequently just a way to get attention. A prayer for honesty, waking up, and love that doesn't depend on anything else. What about you? Do you yell to fight back or stay quiet to forgive? Will you live like today is the last day of your life, or will you live deeply enough that tomorrow is worth it? Tell us what you think of Randy Blythe's trip. What do you find most interesting? His revolt, his enlightenment, or his basic humanity? If you think this tale is worth hearing, please share this video, subscribe, and hit the bell to get notifications. The next stories will be much more dramatic, more honest, and just as sad.